You are listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Guesting with me tonight is Dr. Venkman. Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's not too bad outside. Humidity's gone. I can breathe again.
I saw on your tweet there you had some sandhill cranes outside. Those are pretty awesome. They migrate down here from Central Florida because we are beneath the Pine Hills Palace in a secret underground control bunker. You know, we have a remote actual hookup going with you, ease and transit. We'll see what's going on with that. But tonight's movie, 1985, Lifeforce. This movie I've seen, but you haven't, correct?
No, I was going to, but I fell asleep after watching Mark for Death.
Mark for Death coming very, very soon on Kicking It. It's our third Narcigal action movies here.
Oh.
The reason why we're doing Lifeforce tonight, 1985, is one of our fans requested it. They were really into it. And I got to say this. At the time, I was aware of the movie because of the poster, but the movie itself kind of was a bomb back in 85. That being said, my initial thoughts of it, it's actually a decent flick. It's very Britishy, if you know what that means, or if you watch it and go, oh yeah, it's full of British people filmed over there. But it's actually a good-looking film, and the effects are actually special. They're not bad at all. But basically what it is you get a few people up there around Halley's Comet time where they actually find the spaceship. They find some bodies in like a desiccated part of looks like a bat, and they bring it down to London to analyze it. But the bottom line is that there's two dudes and a chick that they find, at least humanoid figures, where basically the humanoid woman comes back to life. She sucks the life force out of guys, and they end up using this to suck all the life force, since the name, and energy out of people to power up their spaceship. And it's pretty neat because when you watch this, it's a sci-fi film, but it has like a horror film to it. It was filmed by Tobe Hooper. This is like his first big budget movie that he did, and he had basically an open script. He had a book by the guy who's a writer who's just a weird dude with a background, but pretty interesting stuff. And they really had to tame it down for this movie. So right off the bat, I gotta sit there and say my first reaction is this movie is definitely worth watching. Frog Minions in channel, so is Christy, and she's saying it's weird, but it's okay. Christy, I'd like to hear what you say was weird about it. Charlie McNeilson is also in channel. Hello, Charlie. Glad to have you with us. Frag, you've obviously been around. Frag, I think you've said it. Jay, the king is here. El numero uno, the big cheese, the big kahuna. I mean, what do you want to call yourself, Jay? Just the king? That's kind of obvious. So, Lifeforce.
So when I see the trailer, so is this it's a vampire slash ghoul like film?
It's not a vampire like sucking your neck, but it's like the old succubus type thing that some people might think of vampires based off, because for the most part it focuses on this very beautiful woman that's for the most part mute and doesn't speak. She's kind of creepy, but she walks around basically nude the entire time. And some people think, oh, because of the lighting and the effects, it's like erotic or it's softcore porn. I would simply say I like the fact that they did it. They didn't shy away from it, but it wasn't gratuitous in your face where it's about sex or this or that. But you can definitely feel the men get affected by her, and it's not just her body, that she just has this compulsion that she has over them, which allows them to kind of get weak in the knees, and boom, she sucks the life force out of them, literally.
One would say she has a psychic link. Almost.
Yeah, once she gets a little bit of your psychic juice, I mean, it's all over. So like one guy she kissed a little bit out of, but she ended up having a reaction with him that they both knew. And without spoiling it, it kind of comes full circle with the commander from the first ship and what's happening. But ultimately, they end up taking over all of London. There's like martial law everywhere. Everyone kind of becomes a zombie because she gets out, and they're sucking life force out of everybody to power their ships. So there's no real backstory. You don't really know what's going on. It just starts off with them seeing the spaceship. So there's a lot of Flash Gordon kind of looking skies. The ship's supposed to be like, I think like 100, 150 miles long, 2 miles tall. I mean, that's how massive it is.
Jeez.
Yeah, Christy's saying I also got a Species 2 vibe of this movie also. Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about just a female.
That's kind of what I was getting into.
Animal. Yeah.
It was kind of like there was another movie where a girl was a vampire, and these gangs wanted to go after her. She had short hair. It was a 80s flick.
Well, the name would be nice, sir.
I gotta look it up. It just because it just brings back my childhood when I'd flip through and they used to play movies on 18 here would be like your Sunday movies. They'd be, of course, they'd be heavily edited though.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
they was called it Super 18 Super Sundays. That was early 90s.
Huh. Well, the vampires obviously were a thing there too. Frag is saying that the only thing he would change about this movie is the opening and the closing theme songs. It really fails to set the mood for the movie. Yeah, it's the question is what kind of tone were they going for? Sci-fi? Were they trying to go for more horror? Because it kind of feels like both. That's not a bad thing, but the movie, there's not a lot of dialogue in it. There's just enough to keep it moving forward. But I got to sit there and say, 30 plus years after seeing this film when it came out, it really is visually attractive. It's worth watching. It's not overblown. It's not in your face. It's not horribly CGI. The practical effects with the bodies turning into dust are actually pretty darn good. I mean, I was slightly impressed. It's nowhere near like Vampires with John Carpenter, late '90s, or something like Blade, also at the same time too. But you know,
I gotta ask though, is this the first time we've seen Patrick Stewart in a movie?
it's the earliest that I recall seeing him. He may have been in some others, but Patrick Stewart, yes, before he was Jean-Luc Picard, he's in this, and he looks pretty much about the same. He kind of sounds almost a little younger, but he plays a doctor that you see a little bit about halfway through the film. Yeah, for me, this movie, it's kind of hard to sit there and say at the time why did it bomb. I think it's because it really wasn't identified it as one movie or the other. So you really kind of know, hey, I'm going to go see a horror flick. Hey, I'm seeing a sci-fi flick. Because back in 84, 85, you definitely had your choice of these things to go see.
See, it's cool because basically the ones who criticized the movie were the American critics at the time. Like, they're saying, like you said, it was like a vampire softcore porn. But on the other hand, you had comic book writer C.J. Henderson praise the film. He said it's an incredible film and may be the most intelligent vampire movie ever made. And he said the ideas Brent and Lifeforce presented are beyond other vampire movies, beyond all of them, light years beyond. The story is what makes this movie hum. Lifeforce is a true thinking sci-fi fan film.
It's, there's not a lot that you have to think about. So when London basically gets overrun, there's a scene where the doctor's driving through town, and I think it's St. Peter's Cathedral is where she's at. She's kind of calling them. You see the life force going from there up. It's actually shot fairly well. Like I say, I mean, it's very believable. It's not hokey. It's not super cheap. I mean, it's legitimately a big budget film. But for something like this, like I say, to watch it years later, you normally be like, oh, it doesn't look that good, or it looks like crap. No, there's riots in the streets. There's fires going off. There's life force being transmitted. You see, of course, the red telephone booths that you would normally see all over London, anywhere in Europe. I mean, it's a good-looking, simple film to watch. There's not a lot to distract you. And when, say, the doctor's trying to get into the cathedral and he's walking over these bodies, if you're a big-time sci-fi fan and you've seen stuff like Soylent Green, that might bring that to mind. But it's a better film than what I think it's probably given credit for. And the reason why I put it in the description for tonight's discussion was that it's not worth being discussed enough, because again, if something got bombed, not anybody talked about it, or it didn't find life on VHS, or of course later DVD, especially from the 80s, it'd be all but forgotten. And I know you said you haven't seen it, and I know you were looking forward to see it. Did you know that the lady's nude most of the time in it? I mean, we mentioned that earlier.
Well, of course, Englentine, that's all I talked about when we brought it up. Not that he's a bad guy like that, no. No, but I was reading about apparently film critic Gene Siskel Libre, and usually he gave this movie 3 out of 4 stars. He said basically it's a guilty pleasure, and I usually don't pay attention to what those guys say because I'm not getting paid for being a critic, so why should I listen to what he's actually getting paid for it?
Yeah, I think the thing with Ebert at the time, he'd been doing it for a while, but you had a lot of different people that would give their opinions in print, obviously in the newspaper, on TV. They were nationally syndicated, and he had been around. Rex Reed had been doing it forever. He's still doing it with The Observer. Almost, if you knew somebody and you'd followed a particular person well enough, you could almost understand whether or not you think you would like the movie based off of how you interpret that. So if he liked it, and you like the way he reviewed stuff or the way he wrote things, you'd be able to sort of say, okay, I probably would like it. But it's not a movie that tries to do too much. It's not a movie that tries to
what this movie
over the top, though.
Do you know what this movie lost to in the box office? Ron Howard's Cocoon.
Say again?
Ron Howard's Cocoon outdid this movie in the box office that year.
Cocoon was just massive, though.
I know.
Cocoon was a very feel-good kind of film. In a way, it's about Lifeforce because it's about old people that recover their vitality with these cocoons in the pool. But Lifeforce is kind of like, what I like about Lifeforce is, and that can make it almost sound scary, is that it deals with just nature in general, where you have, in essence, you have a life force, whether it's a religious thing, whether it's just a fact of nature. And this just kind of deals with the unknown. You don't know where they come from. You don't know what's going on with it. You just know that something's happening and it has to be dealt with, and that's it. So it's still kind of scary because you don't have a lot of science backing you up. You see the effects that happen really, really quickly with London being overrun and what can happen. You can see the energy is required to go from one place to another. I mean, that's one of the basic laws of nature. Energy is conserved. So to me, the fact that they have it through a female, which in the natural world kind of dictates how everything goes on, I think is legitimate. It's not, like I say, cheesy, where it's an excuse just to have boobs and butt flying around. And the girl does a very good job. She's attractive. She's well built. She's not walking around, like a bubblegum chewing teeny bop or anything like that at all. No, she's got this look on her eyes where she doesn't blink, and it's kind of scary and creepy watching. You're like, hey, this performance is pretty good. Music's outstanding too. It's got this massive orchestral score, so it reminds you of something like, say, from the Hammer films back in the 50s and 60s, like the Christopher Lee type Dracula movies or the Frankenstein series. And it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful shot film. I mean, I'm surprised watching it because a part of me thought, oh, it's going to be 80s. It's not going to look that good. It's going to be a little soft.
Yeah.
But I'm watching this going, no, this is kind of a high class science fiction thing without being fruity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I believe Orson Welles had, didn't he also have a book that dealt with us vampires as well? I thought he did in his memoirs.
I'm unaware of that.
No, it wasn't Wells. It was Lovecraft's writing.
Well, H.P. Lovecraft is in the public domain, so a lot of stuff can be used. This is something different.
The Mind Parasites, Space Vampires, and the Philosopher's Stones. So this is basically, I think it's based off, isn't it based off of a H.P. Lovecraft book?
The gentleman whose book this movie was based off of is kind of, like I say, an interesting fellow with his background, because I think H.P. Lovecraft and a few other types of philosophical arguments that were relatively new and going through their growing pains over the course of the past 100 years really influenced him, and so he wrote this.
Okay.
And apparently the book is super intense, so if you're hardcore in a sci-fi, not space opera, which is juvenile and light kind of stuff, but if you're really into the hardcore stuff like hardcore Heinlein or hardcore Asimov, or gosh, any of the classic golden age sci-fi authors, then I think you would really like this movie. If you're just going, oh, I want to see vampires suck blood or something, and this is it, you're going to be disappointed. But it really is kind of a combination of it. It's not a detective movie. It's not an action film. Of course, there's some explosions. There's some of this and that going on in it. But really, it's just about watching what happens and watching a guy basically say, something happened. I'm responsible for it. This woman's got a hold on me, literally. And he basically sacrifices himself to try to save the world. And it's not a pleasant kind of thing. It's like, holy crap, because again, you've got streets being swarmed with people chasing everybody down the world. It's not happy. It's full of doom, which goes against anything 1980s, like we've talked about on our Top 10 Tuesdays.
All right, Peter Firth, I just remembered where he's from. He's from Hunt from Red October with Sean Connery. I believe he's one of the Russians in there.
Probably you're saying Cocoon had naked people, old people. What were we smoking in the 80s? Well, before it was crack, it was cocaine, and then the cheap stuff, and PCP if you're a TJ Hooker fan. Fragminion saying it ain't artsy, but Venkman goes full artsy in 5 seconds. Yep, that's true. He does. And he recalls the book is based on had kind of a crappy title. Yeah, I think they had to kind of dress up a little bit, and they had to make it basically digestible for film, which sometimes you almost have to puff things up and straight out. This, they had to cut a lot out, I think, and really kind of simplify it for it, really.
In my defense, there is someone who could have went artsy in like 4 paragraphs longer than I did. But we'll
Well,
move on from that.
Species, is another movie that came out in the 90s, sci-fi film with Natasha Henstridge in it, and she basically was a female of her species. And of course, that natural drive that exists for us to drive our DNA literally into the future is the most primal force there is, no matter what form it takes. So you see here at the end of the movie this really interesting scene where normally the lady that's been sucking the life force out's been kind of like a stalking kind of Michael Myrish, I'm going to walk really, really slow and come to you. I will compel you. You will come to me. I will suck the life force out of you. Well, the commander who originally discovered all this he has a psychic bond because his life force wasn't sucked out 100%, but she basically compels him to come. So they're in St. Peter's Cathedral and they're just standing up, just making up massively. And the guy that's kind of helping out a little bit, a SAS guy, he ends up trying to help the captain out here towards the end. And some religious people, I'll simply say, might be offended because there's some violence in the cathedral. And it's pretty interesting to see two people at the very end potentially dying as a sword gets driven through both of them with all this life force energy flying around. It sounds kind of trippy, but when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, it makes sense. I get it. It's kind of cool looking. And again, the effects are just not bad. The sword almost looks like a little bit of Conan, though. Some piece of metal that came from the spaceship that had something to do with them. But then you do see their essences go up to the spaceship. So yeah, Stanley Kubrick-ish, a little John Woo-ish, definitely not Sean Connery-ish. But it feels very big. I mean, watching it's a decent film. It's underrated. I wish I had seen it much earlier in my life.
Yeah. So I was gonna say I was looking at some of the photos on IMDb, some of that stuff. You look at the bat creature. If you obviously haven't seen it though, just standstills don't really do it justice for the giant when she turns into giant bats. But I look at where she's first sucking the life force out of the doctor, where she's just skin and bones. I mean, you kind of get that Day of the Dead kind of a vibe from the 70s.
Yeah, kind of like exactly. If you see, obviously, I think most of our fans have seen the Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, those movies. If you actually, seen kind of what some of the zombies look like a little bit, you almost kind of see it here. I'm not sure about who did the actual practical effects, but you're right. There's definitely a sense of familiarity with it. There's nothing weird, nothing stupid. It's not dumb looking. They look pretty good, and there's a few scenes where people turn into that, but then it goes one stage farther and you kind of see them turn into dust and basically explode. And that's kind of cool too. But yeah, I mean, this movie's just basically a big circle. It's Halley's Comet, which I was alive for at the time. I remember saying it was a big deal. And of course it comes around every 70 odd years or whatever. And so basically towards the end, their life force goes back up to their ship, which is in the, gravitational pull of Halley's Comet. And so the idea is, maybe it'll come around again in another so many years, and you don't know how it got there in the first place or why they were all mostly dead. You just don't know any of these things. So again, fear of the unknown, which is all great horror comes from, it's based on that.
See, now hearing about this movie, I kind of wish there was a prequel comic, if they would have done something like that. This is straight up comic material.
Yeah, and without reading too much about it, I think Canon might have been involved in it, and they went under. Canon was pretty big in the 80s with some action films like we've done with Chuck Norris and some others. But Christy's saying in the channel that John Dykstra did the special effects. The effects, Christy, are special. I have to say they actually look pretty good. Well, to me, special effects aren't there to be special and to be flashy. They're there to add to the story, much like most everything else is supposed to be, the music and whatnot. I would agree with Frag, though, as far as the beginning and ending music. To me, this isn't necessarily a happy movie. I'm not going to say it's sad, but it should be a bit darker. And I'm looking at the ending theme right now. It kind of is a little, God, I hate to say it, Star Wars-y-ish. It's a little nice and happy-ish. I'd rather be a bit more doom and gloomish because that's what the movie feels like to me. Not a lot of vulgarity in it, but it treats itself very seriously as you're watching. It doesn't treat itself like it knows it's a slasher film, let's say.
All right. Let's look and see if anybody was any notable actors in here besides Peter Firth.
Patrick Stewart.
Oh yeah.
His first.
He's a big giveaway, but
sir.
He's the first one you're gonna see when you hear this movie, But sometimes you don't realize that some of these side characters, supporting characters, are in other movies. get the recognition they deserve.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to bring up too about this film, because I know as we've been reviewing these films and figuring out which ones we'd like to review, I know that some of us, especially as we're doing commentary, some of you in channel had joined us for Commando, and we're planning on doing some more like that. I've been noticing, I think on a Twitter feed, Blah had tweeted about having John Carpenter's stuff being remastered and maybe them redoing some things like They Live and whatnot, and I agreed with them, but I've noticed that, like, say, Lifeforce, sometimes the cuts that you find, whether it's on Netflix or Amazon, aren't the cuts that you might find through alternative sources. Or let's say Eric Breen's a big Blu-ray guy, and his cuts, might have a few extra scenes for it. I would say this, like I say, this is a very good-looking film. I watched the longer version of it, and I think it's a little better because of that. I like seeing extra stuff. I don't like things necessarily being cut out. So hopefully, if you guys choose to end up watching this film, you'll watch it. It's well paced. I would say it's a medium paced film. It's not fast. It's not slow. It's just sort of there. You pretty much know what's going to happen as it goes on. There's not a lot of surprises to it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's no stupid stuff that you go, okay, I hate this character, I hate this dude. They get on it pretty quick, and it happens, and it's got its three distinct acts. The finding what's going on, introducing all the characters, then the crap fest that happens, and the shitstorm, and then the resolution in Act 3.
Okay, now I remember. Now I recognize where I know this girl from, because when you look at her photo on Thinger, I didn't really recognize her at first. She's from Jackal with Bruce Willis and Richard Gere.
Who's that?
Mathilda May, the one who plays the space girl.
She's with which movie?
Jackal. The Jackal with Bruce Willis and Richard Gere.
Oh, she would later to go on and star with that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Very stunning debut. This film, though. I mean, yeah, I wonder if part of her being nude in it was something that they would have dealt with here in the States, because the standards were a lot different then than they are now. Like I say, you definitely see a lot of nudity with her, but it's not gratuitous. Again, like I say, it's not in your face. No. It's not offensive. It's for the story. It's really good. Let's see. We've got Frag saying, I got this on Blu-ray. Looks pretty good to me. Nice job there, Frag. I'm sure you've seen it. I'll be honest with you guys. I had heard about this film. I had never seen it. I knew of it. Didn't really know what it was about. And I think that was one of the reasons why it bombed, because if someone said, hey, Space Vampires, go watch it, I'd been like, yeah, cool. But depending on which trailer you saw or which poster you saw, you might be like, because let's be honest, covers make a book. It decides what we're going to take a look at, as well as posters and whatnot too. And for me, I kind of just didn't get it, I guess. But one of our viewers early on in the stream, so after Eric Brand had mentioned Commando, had mentioned Lifeforce, and he was adamant about how solid it was. And Englentine and I had talked about it on an earlier stream back, I think in October, November last year, when we were doing just some basic ones when you guys would join in, and mentioned about it too being good. So I was definitely curious about seeing it. I wanted to get it in after Commando, so that's why we wanted to get a hold of that tonight. So based off of what we've discussed, Doctor, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in seeing Lifeforce?
I would say about 7. Pretty up there. Definitely gonna watch it. Definitely gonna watch it. I mean,
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to hear what you have to say about it, because one of the things I think has been interesting for some of you that have been listening to the Kickin' It action reviews, we had gone through the Steven Seagal films, and we're halfway through them now. We'd gone through some Chuck Norris ones. The interesting thing for me is the older of the couple that you guys are listening to right now, is that being a millennial, I like to hear your perspective on things, because it is different. But I do know you like the 80s. I know a lot of people on channel are very passionate about the films, which I think that's great. The confession I would have to make about this film is that I wouldn't say it's extreme. I mean, it doesn't pass the extreme test where it's like, oh man, you got to go see it.
No,
but it's very good. It passes the Meg test, and it's still better than almost anything that I think that I've seen this year in regular theaters. It's better than Pet Sematary. It's better than Crawl a little bit, maybe.
Well, Christy says she gives it a 6.5, so definitely gonna watch it.
But she's got Ugg in there. It's like, Christy, are you trying to give it a 6? You're trying to give it a 7? I mean, come on. Yeah,
Well,
you don't consider yourself millennial. Well, I like to joke with the
this
millennial
well
things
this
because people are sensitive, and when you say extreme, it's like, well, just this is good, this is bad. Tell us why. And in today's world, that's kind of like an extreme take because most people don't think for themselves. So
you know
that's the inside joke on the Extreme Movie Show.
well I take her reviews with a grain of salt. This is from coming from a girl who did not like Hudson Hawk. So
Well, Hudson Hawk's different. And if Christy doesn't like Hudson Hawk, she doesn't like Hudson Hawk. Beckman will be watching it from behind the couch. This movie gets kind of scary for young
no,
people.
it's only if there's dolls in there. If there's like talking dolls, yeah, no.
No, this is what I would call kind of classic sci-fi. It's got enough of the horror element to it where it's not pure science fiction, but it's not the space opera light stuff like you might see Starship Troopers that really you can get a lot more hardcore in the book, and there's a lot of really good science fiction back in the 80s, but they would have to dumb it down just to make it into a movie. So this is somewhere kind of in the middle, and it is British. It has a feel to it. I really do like that. I'm a sucker for like their props and their effects and where things are filmed. I'm a huge hammer horror film. I know I've been trying to tweet everything over on some UK channels, trying to get the UK contingent on board. Seems like we have an American one and a slight Indonesian one as well. I know Englentine's hitting the Asian angle a little bit too, but my goodness, I think the Brits would really want to get in and talk about this, especially since we've done all the Bond films too. There's kind of talking dolls. Maybe.
So did you watch it? No, I didn't watch it yet. So there's talking dolls in there. I'm done.
But I've never really talked to you till we started actually doing some of these film reviews. Are you a big science fiction fan?
I do love. I loved Back to the Future. I didn't care for the third one. I thought the third one was horrible and should have been made.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love westerns, but man, that was a hokey western. That wasn't even good western. Paint Your Wagon was better than Back to the Future 3 for me, at least.
Well,
the only thing making that movie interesting was the fact that the DeLorean's still in there. But then the whole train thing, yeah. But that's another review. We'll go. I'll get chewed up by E on that stream.
yeah, I don't know that I consider those science fiction, honestly.
But science fiction, like Leviathan. I mean, well, I'm trying to think of because science fiction could be anything that's made believe in as that's fantasy. Not a fan of Lord of the Rings. Hate me all you want. Thought it was boring.
Well, we're talking movies, so not books, as we always like to say. It's not as good as the book, but still, I think that science fiction is hard to define, but when it's good, it's very good. I think in this case here, you get a little bit of a dose of it because when you have basically, zombies, everyone loves, The Walking Dead, or it's really been popular for about 10 years now, but really the 80s jumpstarted the whole zombie thing. So what was once old is now new again, is the way I look at it. Been there, done that, seen it better in the 80s is the way I look at it too. So, at least in our show or in this movie here, somebody gets naked. I don't recall them doing that in The Walking Dead. Okay,
no.
I don't recall Walking Dead zombies exploding. I recall maybe going a few episodes, except and seeing almost none of them. And there's a bunch of blah 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 going on here. At least you're watching the action go on without a lot of over the top dialogue. I mean, it's a film. You get to see it, and it's beautiful. That's what it's supposed to be. I mean, so God, The Walking Dead could learn so much from Lifeforce.
Yeah, the funny thing about Walking Dead, everyone's basically got naked and taken a shower except for Daryl. Norman Reedus has not stripped down in that show whatsoever. So
I'm impressed that you've not only remembered that fact and can recall that fact, but that you openly admit to knowing that to everybody. Thank you for that.
Well, I'm just saying that it's like he's the one that's actually had the dignity to not to show his ass on the freaking show. No.
Well, as we wrap things up here, I want to mention two things. Christy's congratulating us on 100 subs. I'd like to say thank you. I know you're leading the female contingent, as I like to say, as far as everything out there too. I know I've been trying to tweet out some people and on Reddit as well. I think we're at 102 the last I saw today. So after 100, 200, 250, 300, 500, 1,000. I think I didn't want to sound arrogant and say, well, only 99,900 left to go so we can hit 100K, because I think that would make it where we're self-sufficient. But it goes in fits and starts, and we got a lot to do. So I wanted to do this Lifeforce tonight because we had a fan interested in wanting us to discuss it. And so we're trying to, based on the feedback you guys give us, use that as a decision-making tool to kind of decide what we may cover, because there's so much of it, and there's so much good stuff in the 80s. Now, Frag's mentioning in there, what was the horror movie, Telly Savalas, Christopher Lee, and Peter Cushing? It's basically The Thing on a Train. And I immediately put in all caps Horror Express, because I have the DVD sitting on my shelf of that film. Horror Express is phenomenal. It's I believe it's Hammer. Those are the kind of movies I grew up watching with my father and my brother. Great stuff. It's a niche market, but we're definitely gonna have an entire thing like Kicking It that's action movies, not just martial arts, but action. That we just do horror, and that's definitely going to be on there. So I'm waiting to, September-ish maybe, to kind of get going on that, and that's something we've been talking to in the background. Who wanted the Lifeforce video? Eric? No, and it wasn't Eric.
Was it Edward Brewer?
Back and check. No, it was not Eric. I believe wanted Commando. I believe he was the one that wanted that. Remember how he had issues with his Blu-ray?
I don't think it was Edward either. I think it was. Yeah. But we'll find out.
Yeah, Frag, one thing, to actually go in a little bit of detail, he's saying Horror Express is public domain live stream movie time. Yeah, the commentary thing that we did with Commando is interesting, because ultimately what we'd like to do is somehow turn some of these into podcasts as well, in addition to doing live streaming. So we're trying to work out some technical issues and schedules and whatnot, and practice them before we do them. So we wanted to be able to sync up Commando, which personally I didn't think would get a lot of views, because I thought, if somebody was new to the channel that you guys would introduce to it, or they fell upon it, they'd go, okay, well, I get that they're starting at a certain time. I didn't think that honestly a person would kind of start at that time and then play the movie and listen along, because if the audio creeps through, you can end up semi-shadow banned if you get enough strikes, I guess, like he has been on his other channel. The Lover of Lists, the curator of comics, all things that are cool like that. So we're trying to figure out the right way to do it, and we're definitely going to do some more commentaries, but public domain, there are things out there, like you said, not just Horror Express, that are worthy. And I know some people on some channels do other things, which we have not quite figured out yet how they get away with it, for lack of a better term. So it's kind of new for us doing it. So he's such a master what he does with his comics over there, and I'm honestly not familiar with it. We discuss what we think might work over here, but basically it comes down to what you guys like. But Horror Express, love it, love it, love it. I could watch anything with Christopher Lee in it, even the original Wicker Man, which is a good film. He's got so much stuff. The Dracula film, when he's in the 70s and there's Kung Fu in it. Oh, yeah, the Fu Manchu stuff he's in. Boy, you want to talk about some pain to watch. Oh, that's good stuff. Yeah, Eric missed Commando, but he knows what's going on with it. We had talked about that offline, so that's pretty good, though, too. Okay, so as we're wrapping things up, final thoughts there, Doctor.
I just gotta say, I mean, this movie, every time I look at the trailer, or you guys, you especially seem really excited about it. I mean, like you said, it wasn't the best movie, but it's still a movie you should give at least give it a try, watch it. So I'm definitely, based on what I'm hearing, I'm definitely gonna watch this.
Well, and the next movie that we're going to be looking at too, and he actually wants to get on it, is going to be Marked for Death, Steven Seagal, with the Jamaican Posse. That you'll see some tweets going out for, because it's a fun movie. I know over on Kicking It, I wanted to tell you publicly, officially, I just checked before we started and you hopped on. One of our Chuck Norris videos actually just hit 100 views. I'm really excited about that. And there's another one that's, I think, 2 away from hitting 100.
That was Eye for an Eye, I believe, was it? Or no, Force Vengeance.
Force of One.
Force of One?
No, Force Vengeance. That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's another one that's getting ready to hit. So some people are really vibing on the Chuck Norris. So I put a playlist up on that.
How can you not? How can you not? It's Chuck Norris. No.
Well, if you don't know, you don't know. But what you do know is 1985, Lifeforce, solid film. Yeah, Frag says once it's going, it's a roller coaster of oh shit and what the fuck. Yeah, it is. It's the roller coaster. Once it starts sliding downhill and you start hitting the turns, you're like, okay, I see where the ending is, but I'm enjoying the ride. It's definitely worth it too. So for myself, for Dr. Englentine, and for Ian Spear, guys, thank you for listening to Lifeforce 1985 here on the Xtreme Movie Show. We will see you soon. And as always, Doctor,
Stay extreme.
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 Good night, everybody. Take care.